Peace be upon you. I'm Qadi Tayyib, and this is part three from the series from the Islam of the Quran to the Islam of the Hadith. Imam Al-Shafi'i, the true founder of traditional Sunni Islam religion. Welcome to Quranomics. Part three, titled The Maker of His Time Inventing the Sunnah Revelation. The word Sunnah is originally the way people generally conducted their lives. And it is not always the praiseworthy way, but it enters into the good and the bad. It is well known that the word Sunnah in the Book of God is the Sunnah of God that has no transformation or alteration, or the Sunnah of the ancients before, and it's told under a group of Quranic stories to take a lesson from them. A little pause here. The word Sunnah, every time it's mentioned in the Quran, and I urge everyone to open it up, especially if you read Arabic. When the word Sunnah is mentioned, it talks about the totality of people, everybody. It talks about the way God intend for life to be on earth, the way people interact. Never mentions one specific person. Now, if you open up the word, if you look up the person, let's say Abraham and Muhammad and specific group of people, God used the word iswa. Iswa is not sunnah. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله إسوة حسنة. You had in Muhammad a prime, good, excellent, exemplary, a perfect example. Abraham, the same thing. A group of people, you were good guidance, a perfect exemplary. The word iswa, when God in the Quran talks about certain people and he names them or he mentions them, he says iswa. And it's available, I think, in 3 or 4 verses. And sunnah is also the same way, probably in 4 verses. When it talks about sunnah, it talks about everybody, not mention anybody specific. It talks about everybody, the way of life of people. But when he talks about a certain group, he talks about the same thing. And when he mentions iswa, he talks about a certain people that they were good exemplary in what they did. As if it's part of being part of the sunnah life. Now, this is just a little note that something to pick up on. There are no synonyms in the Quran in Arabic language. So, Al-Shafi'i's dedication to the concept of the Sunnah as a legislative source became the legislator and the legislation, judge and executioner, the first outlet for the Book of God and the backbone of the rulings, prohibitions, analysis, and fatwas that it entailed after it. So, Al-Shafi'i distinguishes and invents the terms of a book that is followed, the Quran, and a book that is not followed, not recited, the Sunnah, the action of the Prophet, and synonymous with them, and interprets the Sunnah as symbolized by an unwritten revelation performed by the Prophet, from which he entered that all the actions and words of the Prophet are a revelation not recited. So he's saying that even though there's a book of God is recited, but the actions of Prophet Muhammad, even though it's not recited, but it's practiced. Because actually every deed that he done is actually a reflection or an execution of God's revelation. So it's a revelation in action. In the book of the message, Al-Shafi'i explicitly avoided saying the word revelation. Basically, he had 2 books. One is the message, and the other one is the mother. So he avoided saying the word revelation because it was too early and too much for the people to handle. And he will make it clear in his second book, The Mother, but he is currently in the book of the message. He used the word casting in horror, Ilqa al-Raw, the book of the message. And he recited in the splendor of everything that he enacted, and his sunnah was wisdom. So it was what he cast in his splendor as his sunnah, and it is the wisdom that God mentioned. Page 88 to 103. That's if you want to read up on it. In the book, Invalidation of approbation from the Book of the Mother. The messenger of God never gave a chance to anything except by revelation. From the revelation, what is recited, and from it is a revelation to the messenger of God, so he will be reconsidered by it. It has been said, unless he recites a Qur'an and he was alive. In fact, Al-Shafi'i was not the first to baptize the Sunnah by revelation, for he was preceded by people of Hadith. And Al-Shafi'i mentioned three of his sayings in his book, The Mother, in the book of marriage. But despite the fact that there were precedents over Al-Shafi'i by saying with revelation, their words are considered mere scattered sayings here and there. Like I said, it was commonly known. It was common. It was something common. No one really thought about tying the noose around the word sunnah, taking it away from life and throwing it on one person. Had it not been that Al-Shafi'i established it in a coherent theoretical body and became the founder of a new Islamic religion, just as Paul the Apostle founded a new religion called Christianity. So let that sink in for a moment. And you guessed it, he copied it. He did the same things. Al-Shafi'i was the maker of his time more than the son of his age in dedicating the Sunnah as a revelation, comparing the two tablets of the Qur'an and making them the legal quorum in their reference as in the authentic. Note, when we talk about Al-Shafi'i's writings, we should be very careful. Al-Shafi'i did not write, but rather dictated. Rabi' ibn Sulaiman narrated from him, as Al-Umm Al-Buwaiti narrated. So it is said, and is probably well known and documented. And the narrator of these two, despite their fame, was by listening and was by transmitted by listening. The oldest manuscript copy of the treatise of these two books, which is attributed by permit, bears the date of 265 AH after Hijrah. That is more than 60 years after the death of the Prophet. So these two people were the main students who basically, in the present day, we would call them uh, biographers who write authorized biography, but they were their students because back then the scholars would give their lessons in a ring where everybody sit around, and these two were the smartest, let's just say, and they memorized everything. So they were the walking books around. They were walking the books until they wrote it down, and they wrote down everything, and they were permitted by Al-Shafi'i. It was validated by him that they are okay, whatever they recite in his name is goes. So the books of Al-Shafi'i met with a violent clash with the Mu'tazila, and they are a group based and they based their faith and creed by having a logical thinking approach, which were completely liquidated after several centuries of hunting, killing, condemning, shaming them. And it is difficult to determine their identity now, except for a few, which today can be called the Quranic, and they're back on the rise. Those who consider the book alone, without the Sunnah attached to it, as the only reference in the divine statement. Al-Shafi'i included in the book of collecting knowledge and explicit reference to them and the response to them in the chapter. This is the title of the chapter on the story of the saying of the sect that rejected all the news. That's what they call, in an example, the news is called the Hadith. The news, I mean, the news that came from afar, that They were not witness to it, but it's news. Like I said, news always surprise you with something new. So they called the Hadith news. Al-Shafi'i does not hesitate to stress, deny, falsify it on any hadith and its narrator as it seemed to him, as if it were invalidating his claim. So, as we said, it's cherry picking. And we will find out that even though Al-Shafi'i laid down the rules, he was the first one to break them. He had no problem with that. And because he will find out and fix it as he'll go along. So he'll make a rule, and then later down the road, he'll find something that if he applied this rule to the hadith, it will demolish him, it will destroy him. So what he do, he invents another rule and another exception, another amended, and he will just keep on going like that and then the other scholars will come after him and do the same thing. So that's why you have so many fatwas, so many rulings, so many. One scholar would say yes, the other scholar would say no. It's because it's just a game. It was not set from the beginning. It was just basically we'll just play it as it goes along, and that's what his problem was. But we will find out more. And this is just one. You have to excuse me for my reading, but I'm doing my best. I said 3 4 minutes, but looks like it's more than 3 4 minutes. Probably double that or triple. But bear with me, and I hope you enjoy and understand and find out something new. I'm Qadi Tayyib. This is Quranics, and we'll see you again in. I think is that part. See you.